Welcome everyone. Kamna Maori, Yandra Vinaka. Hello Olgeta, Talofa Lava, Maloi Lele, Tena Koto Katoa, Kia orana, Pakalofa Lahiatu, Namaste, good day, good morning, aloha. Welcome everyone. My name is Katerina Teaiwa. I'm an associate professor in Pacific Studies and a deputy director of the School of Culture, History and Language here at the ANU and the College of Asia and the Pacific. I'm also chair of the Oceania Working Party of the Australian Dictionary of Biography that is hosting this event today. My father is of Banabin and Tabataoan descent from Kiribati and Fiji. My mother is African American from Washington, DC. Before we begin, it's really important that we acknowledge the lands on which we are gathering, the indigenous lands on which we are gathering. So I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the lands on which I am speaking to you from today, here in Canberra, and the wider ACT region. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which you are gathered as well. I would like to pay respect to the elders, past and present, and I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I acknowledge that their sovereignty absolutely and totally was never ceded. Before we begin, I would like to introduce Melanie Nolan. She's a professor of history here at the ANU and director of the National Centre of Biography. Melanie is in charge of the Australian Dictionary of Biography, which you'll hear quite a bit about today because we are the Oceania Working Party of the ADB. So I'd like to hand over to Melanie to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much, Katerina. As people will soon detect, I am a New Zealander and an Australian. And as the general editor of the Australian Dictionary of Biography, it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome everyone here today to this virtual workshop, Sharing Pacific Lives in Australia. It is the ADB Oceania's Working Party's first workshop, and it'll be hosting several of these this year on different aspects of Pacific biography. And if this is any indication, it's going to be a fantastic series. I just want to begin first with a little history as an historian. I first remember meeting Katerina, a meeting we had in her office on the Oceania Working Party in October 2015. An ADB Working Party had existed from the establishment of the ADB in the late 1950s. Our first employee was employed in 1958. And for 20 years, J.W. Davidson chaired this committee until his death in 1973. And then an informal group of ADB PNG Working Party operated for the next 2 decades. And that was led by Di Langmore, my predecessor as general editor, Professor Ken Inglis and Bill Gamage, some people will know of, and others in the ADB community. Now, surprisingly, they'd all lived in PNG. It was an amazing little group of experience and expertise. But since the death of Hank Nelson, it didn't meet again after 2007. And this was not a very good situation. These working parties, the ADB working parties, nominate subjects and authors. And because we didn't have a Pacific Working Party, our list did not include any Pacifica. And we had no advice on more general matters. Now that meant a group of Australians were not covered. Estimates of the number of Australians with Pacific Island descent in Australia is 300,000 to 500,000, and that's over 2% of the Australian population, often as the result of labour exploitation, such as the South Sea Islanders. But of course, there were all other kinds of political and economic relationships that made for entwined history. And so we just weren't getting this group in our history, this group in our vista. So from 2002, we worked with Bridge Lal. He was then acting director of the School of Culture, History and Language within the College of Asia and Pacific. And we developed a Pacific Islander biography website. Now, basically, that was just taking the biographical entries from Bridges and Cape Fortune's The Pacific Islands Encyclopedia. We saw this as a first stage development. It was better than nothing. It was a good place to start. In 2014, Bill Gamage came back on the scene. He was a member of the earlier Working Party, and he suggested that the ADB should reconstitute the PNG Regional Working Party, and he approached the chair of the editorial board. And after internal discussion, we decided to revert to the original 1959 plan to have a working party that was a big Pacific, including New Zealand. Now, that of course led us to all kinds of discussions about what constituted Pacific subjects. Were there only people born in the region? Do they include people who just walked onto the stage, if you like, for a little time? Did it include New Zealand, the Cocos, Norfolk, Pitcairn, all of Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, all these sorts of discussions? Well, as a consequence, in April 2015, the ADB editorial board agreed to the establishment of a single big Oceania Working Party. And that's how we found our way to Katerina's door. And it's a big working party with big ambitions. We hadn't factored in Katerina's energy, passion and enthusiasm. We knew the relationship with the Oceania Working Party united two core strengths of the ANU, the Australian National University. The skills we've developed over 55 years in procuring biographical compendia and our biographical information management system. And secondly, being aligned with the School of Culture, History and Language, and more broadly, the College of Asia and Pacific, which is one of the world's leading research centres on the Asia and Pacific. And it's home to the Pacific Research Archives, and which is the premium centre for research and teaching resources, and also the invaluable Pacific Manuscripts Bureau. We knew those were part of our, if you like, our core. But Katerina and others who were involved, Paddy, wanted a broader vision of an Oceania Working Party that was more inclusive and, of course, using technology. She's drawn together a wonderful team of 22 Pacific scholars. And when I wrote the latest batch of new members, I hear more coming in to the Working Party in last October, I was so impressed by your talent, your range, and of course, your enthusiasm. We have two tasks. We have a current list. This is what we're working on at the moment. That's subjects who died between 1991 and 2000. And the Working Party's role is to identify those who are missing, embellish the list, nominate authors. But we also need to identify missing persons and the content of the existing articles, many of which needs to be revised, also needs to be looking at. So I'm looking forward to members writing articles themselves and peopling the ADB with Pacifica biographical subjects, because I look on you all as prospective ADB authors. The ADB is a peer-reviewed publication. Every article is research edited and assessed and worked on. Few journals have such a thorough editing and refereeing process as the ADB. So we can offer support and with the Working Party, advice and expertise to any authors who are proposing articles. So finally, I extend my best and good wishes for this workshop and for all others in its waka wake.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I think that context and history is so important for this group, and it gives us a bit of a framework for thinking about what we'll be talking about today. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us. And also to Malcolm Albrook, who's part of the ADB leadership team. Thank you for joining us as well. And I just want to acknowledge anyone new who's come in since we began, some of whom are our elders and leaders within the community. Thank you so much for joining us. There will be an opportunity a little bit later for people to introduce themselves in smaller groups after we've had our wonderful speakers this morning. So during this part of the workshop where we will have our featured speakers, please do keep your microphones on mute. And then I'll let you know when to unmute. And then we'll also have a break later. Talei, could you screen share just for a second to show people what will be coming up in the workshop and how we're going to be running things, just so you have a sense of what's coming up. So this is what our day will look like, and we will try to keep to time in terms of finishing on time, but the part in between, we will flow in Pacific style and just see how we go, because we don't want to stifle any conversation or any wonderful discussion that will be coming out of it, but this is generally what we're hoping to do throughout our just under 3 hours together. So again, please feel free to share things in the chat. I've noticed people are acknowledging the traditional lands from which they are coming from, and I think that is very appropriate to do. And we will be talking more about where we're all situated a little bit later. Thank you so much, Talei. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Wendy Mocke, who will be chairing the next session where Lisa Hilli will be speaking, and then I will hand over to her. I'm very excited to have Wendy join us today. I've been following her on Twitter and following her on other platforms and just absolutely loving her voice. I think we have some amazing and powerful voices and storytellers in Australia, Pacific voices, who don't get enough attention, I think, from mainstream media and from other areas where voices about the Pacific are often dominated by non-Pacific speakers and experts. So part of our job in the Oceania Working Party is to get our stories out there in the public to become more visible. So Wendy Mocke is a Papua New Guinean storyteller. She's a graduate of the National Institute of Dramatic Art and an emerging writer at Sydney Theatre Company. Wendy has performed on stages across Australia, and last year her play Jelbu Meri, who she co-wrote with Phoebe Grainer, was featured in Darlinghurst Theatre Company's development program Next in Line. Wendy has a visual arts project called Meri, a collection of photographs and stories that focuses on recontextualizing contemporary Papua New Guinea women. Has that already been on show? Or maybe she'll tell us a little bit more, but it was scheduled for the Contemporary Arts Gallery in Cairns. Wendy was also recently featured in an excellent short film called Chicken, directed by Alana Hicks, about a migrant Pacific mum and daughter and their trials in a local Sydney supermarket. A film that I encourage all of you, please, to watch. Wendy's passion is to uncover and share stories of Black Pacific Islanders. So I'm going to hand over to Wendy now. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you, Sri Katerina. Good morning, true Loyupo Ogita. My name is Wendy Mocke, and my clans are the Karisokra, Kaluku, and Narupo clans of Madang and Simple Province in Papua New Guinea. Now, I am zooming in from the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I am thrilled to be a part of the Oceania Working Party workshop number 1. Today, I have the privilege to be sharing space with you all, in particular, our keynote speaker, Lisa Hilli. Born in Rabaul, Papua New Guinea, Lisa Hilli is a descendant of the Tolai people. Lisa is a multidisciplinary artist and scholar whose previous works have explored the invisibility and visibility of Black and Melanesian bodies and the long and complex history of exchange beads known as trade beads or slave beads between settlers and Tolai people, just to list a couple of Lisa's works. After being commissioned by the Australian War Memorial to take a look at Australia and PNG's shared war history, Lisa came across the story of the F.Mi Sisters of Vunapope. The F.Mi Sisters were 45 Catholic sisters who defied the Japanese forces, endured torture, and labored for 3 years in order to keep bringing fresh food, water to Australian and European missionaries held captive. Today, we are fortunate to have the artistic and creative force that is Lisa Hilli joining us to speak about her critical and creative work in telling the stories of these remarkable Melanesian women during World War II. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the incredible Lisa Hilli, and without further ado, I now invite Lisa to take the Zoom mic. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Susa. Thanks, Wendy. Wow, okay, I'm feeling a bit flattered right now with that introduction, so thank you. I always like to keep my feet planted firmly on the ground and not be too much of a big head, as we say, and talk pisin. So, Bona tuna, thank you, Tru. I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the lands that I am on today. Womanjeka, welcome in their language. And I say Bona Malana in my language. So, and thank you for all coming along. I'm just going to get straight into it. So here we go. Okay, so before I go through the 30 slides that I have for you all, just a quick overview. I've sort of broken it up into sections. So I'm just going to give you the overview of how I found the history of the F.Mi Sisters in the Second World War. I'll touch on a Japanese perspective of why they invaded Rabaul and other Asia-Pacific nations. Then I go into confronting erasure and assumptions of Papua New Guinean women's history and body autonomy. Then I go into the archival research that I did, and then finishing up with the creative development. And I also will use my cultural affiliations of Tolai and Gunantuna interchangeably. Same cultural group, just different names. My preference is Gunantuna because it means I am human, and it also means true people of the place. So, but I will use both Tolai and Gunantuna, just so that's kind of clear. Yeah, so in late 2017, I was approached by the senior curator, Alex Torrens, from the Australian War Memorial, to see if I was interested in undertaking a creative commission. The focus of the commission was to creatively respond to Australia and Papua New Guinea's shared war history of the First World War or the Second World War. The commission was funded by the Anzac Anniversary Arts and Culture Fund and engaged 2 artists, one from Australia, myself, and the other from Papua New Guinea. That was the late elder and cultural historian Gideon Kakabin, who was also Tolai. Both Gideon and I undertook a 3-week research residency exchange. So I travelled to Rabaul, and whilst Gideon travelled to Canberra to undertake his research residency at the AWM. Before travelling to Rabaul, I already knew that my focus would be on Papua New Guinea women in relation to the Second World War. I just wasn't sure what. I'd never done war history research or had any understanding of the Catholic Church, as I was raised in the United Church of Australia, which has its historical. This was all. Oops, just skipped over. Google search term of and my internet connection is a bit unstable, so I may switch off my video. Oh, actually, no, I can't do that. So this revealed one result and a very small lead from an interview with Sister Berenice Toohill, an Australian Catholic sister who was a POW at Ramallah during the Japanese occupation in Rabaul. And her interview made this reference to the Little Sisters or Indigenous Sisters. That was it. It was just that very small reference. That led me to this amazing piece of history. Is everyone able to read that?
Yes, we can read it.
I'll give you a couple of minutes just to read it because I think this is really important to read, just to give you like the overview of what happened, what they did. Tolai mother brought me back to Rabaul as a teenager. She took me to Vunapope to show me where I was born at the hospital. And that's all I knew it to be, just a hospital. Vunapope is in fact the first successful Catholic mission established in Papua New Guinea in 1912. In my language, Vunapope means place of the Pope. Before Gideon travelled to Canberra, we met at the Rabaul Mask Festival in Kokopo, which happens once a year. I had prepared some questions for him to help steer me in the right direction. So those who knew Gideon would know of his incredible generosity of knowledge sharing, either personally or through his infamous New Guinea Islands Historical Society Facebook page. So with the F.Mi Sisters story in mind, I was curious to know a few things from Gideon's perspective. Gideon shared with me several locations of the Second World War sites of significance around Rabaul, key local people to talk to and written references. But what I really wanted to know from Gideon was his perspective of gender balance, gender roles and impacts within our shared Gunantuna culture. I asked him specific questions relating to gender to gain an understanding as a respected male Gunantuna elder and knowledge holder, and to ensure my research and perspectives were balanced, given that my focus was on women. Gideon and I finished up our conversation by sharing what we were going to focus on specifically for our respective commissions. He told me that he was going to focus on the 40+ fallen Indigenous men who were part of the German Native Police during the Battle of Bitapaka in the First World War. So for those of you who aren't aware, I'm assuming some of you are, because there's a lot of historians in the room. Bitapaka was Australia's first military engagement in World War I and was the site of a radio communications tower. And you can see it on this map here. So the 40 Indigenous men are still yet to be identified. Gideon's work for this commission was not completed due to his sudden death in Canberra in August in 2018, which was quite a shock for a lot of our people in the community and fellow historians. Working alongside such a significant Tolai elder was one of his final projects was an incredible honour. I shared with Gideon the little known story of the F.Mi Sisters and asked him if he knew of it. I distinctly remember Gideon's face. He gave me a kind of puzzled and bewildered look. And for me, that was confirmation that I was onto something. Knowing and understanding Gideon's breadth and wealth of knowledge, I knew that if he hadn't come across it, then my gender of being female and Papua New Guinean was a huge advantage to discovering more. So after the Battle of Bitapaka, all of Eastern Papua and New Guinea became Australian mandated territory. So this was the next question that I wanted to understand. Why did Japan invade Rabaul in January of 1942, which was at the time an Australian territory? The only thing that had piqued my interest of Japanese military history in Rabaul was a research article that I came across several years prior about Japanese comfort women that were brought to Rabaul. Japanese director Noriko Sakaguchi's award-winning documentary film, Senso Daughters, explores the traumatic impacts of Japanese military brothels across the New Guinea Islands during the Second World War. The Cosmopolitan Hotel in Rabaul was one of several brothels across my homelands. It was also the largest in the South Pacific. The majority of young women brought to Rabaul were Korean and Okinawan, who were allocated for Japanese enlisted men. A smaller percentage were Japanese women reserved for Japanese officers. Many of the Korean and Okinawan women were falsely informed about their services to the Japanese military. This film and history is incredibly difficult and confronting to watch. A Japanese female matron from the film said, "Comfort women were a necessary evil to alleviate any trouble for the native women." However, this wasn't the case. Several New Guinea Islands women spoke of sexual engagements with Japanese soldiers and using indigenous contraception methods to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Japanese male perspectives of New Guinea people and local women in particular were also included, which were unkind and contradictory. What I gained, most importantly from this Japanese female filmmaker perspective, was an understanding of why Japan invaded several Asian and Pacific nations. Emperor Hirohito viewed Japan's engagement as an allied force in the Second World War as the Sacred War. Japan saw itself as liberators of the indigenous people of the Asia and Pacific region from Western imperialism. A former Japanese military personnel spoke of this in the film. He said, "Japan was defending Papua New Guinean people. We only used their land as a battlefield." Oops. So on Gideon's advice, I visited Malmaluan village and spoke to an elder there, Ben Talita, who's pictured here in blue. He lives on the site of one of the former comfort stations, and he told me that there were over 20 Korean women at this brothel, which was based in a kit house, like a temporary structure. At the front of the house were the women's names, and they're listed with their ages, all in Japanese text. The rooms were separated by curtain partitions. Local Tolai people would collect and provide green coconuts, kolau, to drink, rice, pawpaw, bananas and flowers for the Korean women. During my visit, I was told that there were empty sake bottles littered and buried across this historic site, which we actually dug up some while we were there. I was very moved to not just discover Melanesian women's war history, but also Asian women's suppressed history in my homelands. When the Japanese military had no further use for the comfort women, they were sent back across the Pacific on ships. They were not listed as passengers, but as military commodities. So in this next section, I'm going to share two examples of personal experiences. And I wanted to share this particular experience because once I understood Papua New Guinean women's experiences of body autonomy within the complexity of Indigenous culture and religion, my former and invalid perspectives kept being echoed by male and female European and Australian academics whenever I spoke about the work I was doing personally or publicly. So after viewing the Sensei Daughters film, I wandered over to Vunapope Catholic Mission to see if I could find someone from the Daughters of Mary Immaculate congregation. The first sisters I met were the Daughters of Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, or OLSH congregation. I told them about the research I was doing regarding the F.Mi Sisters, and they connected me with Sister Margaret Maladede, the F.Mi archivist. So this is the entrance to Vunapope, which was established in 1880. Sister Margaret Maladede wrote and gave me a copy of her 100-year draft of the F.Mi Sisters' history. She also created the 100-year memorial monument at the front of their convent, which honours all the people who established the Daughters of Mary Immaculate and all the many fathers, mothers, sisters and bishops over the last century. Sister Margaret also honoured the F.Mi Sisters who died during the Second World War. Thanks to her, I found 11 names relating to the story I was interested in. When I met with her, she brought out several books that she used in her research to write the F.Mi Sisters' history. I used and relied heavily on Sister Margaret's manuscript. Getting as close as possible to the source of information and an authentic history is imperative for the work that I do as an artist. Her draft manuscript was her interpretation and her perspective of the F.Mi congregation, Her text was the closest I could get in terms of an Indigenous Catholic sister's perspective of history during the Second World War. I learned so many things from her research and the brief conversation I had with her. After reading her words, I realised that the F.Mi Sisters became the first self-governing Indigenous convent in all of Papua New Guinea. The Catholic Church was not just an institution for women to answer their calling to God, it was also an avenue for Papua New Guinean women to get educated. In 1978, educated F.Mi sisters wrote their own constitution and said to the European and Australian Ulsh congregation, "Thank you very much for helping us to be who we are today. We are now able to take care of ourselves and be responsible for our future." They became an independent congregation in 1979, the same year of my birth at Vunapope. I also realised that the church was an avenue for New Guinea Islands women to escape the confines and cultural restrictions imposed upon them prior to European arrival. There was a poignant moment when I was talking with Sister Margaret about her reason to join the Catholic Church. I had my own presumptions of destructive effects of religion and colonial history within my Tolai culture, but what Sister Margaret said floored me and challenged my own understandings of what I believed to be true. Sister Margaret sat humbly across the table from me and in a casual yet unwavering tone said, "I had absolutely no desire to get married or have children." Hearing this made me think of all the women who were forced to be married against their will to men whom they did not choose, which I didn't realise was a Tolai custom. This custom is called Varakukul. In that moment, I had to do a complete 180-degree shift mentally and critically of everything I believed to be true about religion and culture in my homelands. I did not question or challenge Sister Margaret's views or reasons. I sat quietly and humbly and embraced what she said, despite the inner cyclone of thought that I was contending with whilst in her presence. I met another F.Mi sister whose personal experience exemplified Black feminism through European religion and the Tolai custom of bride price compensation payment, and she was alive during the Second World War. Her name is Sister Angelica. Sister Angelica was born in 1930 and is from Nanga village, the same village as Gideon. When I spoke to her in 2018, she was 88 years old, full of fire with a zest for life. Sister Angelica joined the F.Mi congregation in 1952 and was a pioneer teacher at Takabor School. This is the same school that my elder brother would walk to as a child for his education. I was fortunate to have met Sister Angelica through her niece and namesake, Angie Colita Payne, who was a key member of the East New Britain Queensland Association that my mother is affiliated with. Sister Angelica was shown a picture of an African woman, Sister Kosilla, by Father Damien, which became an inspiration and her calling to God. In the Tolai custom of Warakukul, tabu or shell currency is given by the man's Wunatarai matrilineal clan to the woman's matrilineal clan as a gift of compensation for taking a valued woman away from her family. Sister Angelica's parents had already arranged for her to be married. During the Warakukul ceremony, the tabu is placed in the centre of the village, of the woman's village, and the woman's family would come in and pick up the payment. However, Sister Angelica broke Tolai custom. She picked up the tabu herself and marched it back across to the man's family in refusal. Sister Angelica's family feared for her life as they said that she would be killed, which may have been true for the time. Then Sister Angelica very quietly and bravely told her family members, "Don't worry, I'm running away to the church." What a woman, I thought. When I asked Sister Angelica why she did this, she very assertively said, "I did not choose to marry that man. That was not my decision." Angie translated everything that Sister Angelica said to me that day. There was so much that Sister Angelica said about her experiences that I didn't need to understand verbally. There was so much more that she communicated non-verbally. Her strong, defiant nature, the contentedness that I sensed from her being a woman who was completely autonomous to herself and her commitment to her faith. She was, and still is, a free woman. Hearing and listening to these stories of the two living F.Mi sisters helped me inform my understanding of the F.Mi sisters historically and why they defied the Japanese military by continuing to practice their faith, wear their habit, and sustain the livelihoods of hundreds of European, Australian, and Papua New Guinean civilians detained at Ramallah. The F.Mi sisters did what they did because they chose to, and I think I really wanted to emphasize that point. It was just about having a choice to do whatever they wanted. So to conclude the residency, the research residency, I travelled to Canberra to meet up with Gideon and Alex Torrens at the Australian War Memorial to do archival research. Apart from what Sister Margaret had given me, there was very little else in print or publication form that centred the experiences of the F.Mi sisters during the Second World War. So war history combined with religious history in Papua New Guinea is vast and it's overwhelming. I approached my research with a method of sifting through the 4 research spheres that you can see in that diagram. It was Second World War in Ramallah, Vunapope, and ultimately keeping the F.Mi sisters at the centre of my creative research outcome. Most of the research I found in these 4 research spheres only gave small mentions to the F.Mi sisters here and there, and also gave them a multitude of names over the last 100 years. So that's all the names that I found of them. Coming up with key search terms and words was crucial in narrowing down a huge undertaking of research of war and Catholic history. Catholic congregation records such as the Missionary of Sacred Heart archived by Pambu were significant resources for me. I just want to say, bless you, Pacific Manuscripts Bureau. It was, yeah, the micro films that I view were really, really important for me in my work. I used the same approach when searching the Australian War Memorial photographic archives. When I used those key search terms, I found a large portion of images on the day of liberation of Ramallah. I also found images of mixed race children who are in the bottom square, who I now understand to be the Untitled community, who speak a Creole form of German and Pidgin English. The descendants of those children held at Ramallah live mostly in Brisbane today, and anyone's interested in the Untitled, I will be talking more about that research at the Australian Association's Pacific Studies Symposium later this year. So just from these images, so this is the actual camp, the site of the camp, and this is the hill, the steep incline that the sisters would walk up every single day carrying food. So they would have to walk up to the top of that hill, show the Japanese guards the food that they had. The Japanese guards would take the food and then they'd have to walk back down the hill into the valley to go give the food to the missionaries. And they did that every day for 3 years. So I also managed to find the only image of the F.Mi sisters together, taken inside the POW camp at Ramallah after Japan's surrender. So this is the original image that I used in the artwork. I used the work of Titus Kaffar as a creative reference during my creative development period. Titus is an American painter whose work reconfigures and regenerates art history to include the African-American subject. Over the last few years of my arts practice, I've been intentionally working towards this concept of decentralizing dominant Eurocentric narratives and history through art. And I think Titus Kaffar's work does this very powerfully and very direct. I began the creative development period whilst based in the Northern European city of Helsinki. I was there for 3 months with my mother and son for an artist residency, and I was exploring my paternal Finnish ancestry. I also started working with the Tongan Australian fashion designer and artist, John Gosper. John and I spent many hours together talking about the F.Mi Sisters, looking at the habit, its construction, what it represented, what it was made of, and how it was made. I worked with John because he had an innate understanding of fabric and materiality beyond my own knowledge. He made a habit based upon the archival images and my mother's body measurements, and I started photographing my mum and experimenting with this whilst I was there in Helsinki. I used the disciplines of photography and textiles to communicate ideas. I spent a lot of time examining the black and white image of the F.Mi Sisters at Ramallah. I looked at every detail of the image, every expression of the sisters' face, the lines and veins on their hands, every crease in their clothing. I even figured out how to tie the cincture, which is the fabric tied around their waist. So all of these details are really important for me because it actually made me stop looking at them as a collective, and I looked at them as individuals. So it was about recognize their personalities, their characteristics, but most importantly, their humanity. And so once I was able to see them as individuals, then I could actually make the work. Oops. I wanted to ensure that the F.Mi Sisters were at the center of this story while still including the civilians that they assisted at Ramallah. The way I did that was by thinking about flowers and nationhood. Influenced by European wildflowers in Helsinki summer, I wrote out a list of all the 17 nationalities of all the civilians held at Ramallah and researched the national flowers of their homelands. All of the flowers for each nation, except for America, were native to the lands that they grew on. America has a rose as its national flower, but I chose to use a marigold, which is significant to Native Americans. I kept thinking about how do I honour these women for their duties and relentless service. They trudged up and down that steep incline every day and risked their lives to deliver food to malnourished civilians. Honouring them couldn't be too extravagant as much as I wanted it to be. F.Mi Sisters were essentially humble women. Each professed Catholic sister commits to 3 vows: chastity, obedience, and poverty. I kept this in mind when making this digital collage of watercolour flowers that represents a portion of the many nationalities at Ramallah and also honours the hidden and tragic history of the comfort women brought to Rabaul. I also wanted to ensure that the F.Mi Sisters were named and remembered for eternity. I went back to Sister Margaret's 100-year history manuscript. I found the colour of the cincture worn around their waist, as it is visible in this image. And I realised that, that these cinctures are no longer worn today and were specific to the Second World War time period. I asked John to make 45 4-metre long black cotton cinctures to complement the photographic work. I then asked my dear friend Eddie Carroll, who's an Australian textile artist, to help me embroider the 45 cinctures by hand. We started stitching the cinctures in person between the first and second COVID lockdowns in Melbourne. And then we met over video calls and stitched remotely whilst confined in our homes under Victorian stage 4 restrictions. At the time of stitching, I only noted 11 names, which I found from Sister Margaret's research. And the other 34 cinctures were stitched just with the word sister. And that was intentional to leave a latent space for their other names to surface. And surface they did. So I went back through my research notes and found another 30 names after I completed the commission, but it doesn't matter now, like it's done. And I still have the names. The framed photographic work and 45 cinctures are now held in the National Collection at the Australian War Memorial. I completed the project in July 2020 in the middle of a global pandemic. It was not easy to let go of this artwork. Ultimately, my intention with making this work was to amplify and highlight the history of these remarkable women, given that no one had made a fuss about it in over 75 years. That's how long it's been laying dormant. Much of the research and historical publication isn't written by Papua New Guinean people, nor does it centre their stories or perspectives, and that's what I had to stay true to. Despite numerous well-intentioned, like-minded folks along the way wanting to help me find resources. As a Melanesian and Papua New Guinean woman, our stories will never be told the way we view or experience them unless we do them ourselves. Ngala Boina Tuna, and thank you to Katerina, Talei, and Nick for allowing me the time to share my work and methods with you all. Thank you so much.
Wow, incredible. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Tetsusa. Listen, I'm sure it's not the 3 hours of sleep and 2 cups of coffee I've had this morning, but I'm feeling extremely emotional hearing about our history. It's just incredible work, and it's just so profound hearing about the richness of our history and the importance of our ancestors, particularly the women that played a part in our history, and hearing those stories it's just remarkable. So thank you so much. I will try my best not to mauswara too much, which in Topisin means to dribble on, and stick to the 20 minutes that I have to do the Q&A for everyone. Lisa, first question. On your numerous artistic projects, you've been able to tap into your Gunatuna culture, and I would like to know, how has your culture influenced or played a part in your arts practice?
It's been pretty much a foundation to begin with, but it's been a kind of like inherent one. Like, it was just kind of always there because I was fortunate to have a very strong Tolai mother who raised me in Brisbane with a lot of strong cultural values. And I didn't realize that until I became like an adult, like 24, 25. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that my upbringing was actually quite different to a lot of, I guess, other Australians. And so it's everything. I think just, you know, the matrilineal strength in Tolai culture is really, really significant and really important. You know, the fact that we trace our ancestry through women, and land is shared through women, but that doesn't always necessarily mean it's kind of, there's equality there. And so I think I just kind of assumed that there was. And then when I kind of started talking to the sisters, I had some like really jarring kind of moments, and it was like, oh, okay. But yeah, Tolai culture is just it's been the foundation of my identity, and I'm really fortunate that I have that.
As a Melanesian artist myself, I know that it's, as you mentioned, almost a natural instinct to bring our family with us to the work, or however it is that we approach different artistic projects. You also photographed your mother as a part of the F.Mi Sisters of Vunapope project. What did it mean for you to be a Pacific Gunatua woman documenting this specifically Pacific Gunatuna story?
I don't think I realized the impact of it until I'd finished the work, because whenever I go back home, back to PNG, back to Rabaul, it's really hard to kind of explain to my family, like, you know, what I do as an artist. So I'm a photographer, I think, because I think my family understand that. And so this actual work, I mean, I was there with Stephen, who's here today. I'm not sure if he's still here, Stephen Gagao, and many members of the Tolai community from Brisbane, who were also there at the time I was doing the research. And I was just kind of like, you know, on the kind of edges, just doing my work. And it wasn't until I actually finished the work that I realized what I was doing and why I do it. And I think it was purely because of the fact that it was, one, religion, and two, war. Like, they're two like really, really big kind of notions of cultural identity for Papua New Guineans. And so they totally embraced that and really kind of celebrated it. And I was blown away, because I was like, oh, of course, you know, Papua New Guineans are so religious and so spiritual. And so anything to do with spirituality is just like totally embraced. And so I feel like they finally kind of got what I did and why I do what I do. And I felt really lifted. I felt really lifted by my community, and I felt really proud. And it was probably one of the first times that was kind of like really acknowledged in my 16-year career.
Wow, that's so interesting. I think you're absolutely right, though. The war and religion is kind of a very sort of, I guess, popular theme for Papua New Guineans, and they can sort of jump into that quite quickly and be able to attach themselves to it.
Totally.
So I think as an artist for you, that must have felt like, you know, as you mentioned, the first time that you kind of felt that your community had sort of really kind of understood your work.
Yeah, and that was I think it was just a moment of pride, like just seeing other Papua New Guineans be really proud of these women. And for me, it was like a double win, because it was like, yes, I made this work. I'm really happy it's finished. And yes, now Papua New Guineans, not just women, but men, Papua New Guinean men are embracing this, and they're sharing it, and they're boasting about it. And that is really significant in terms of like the genders issues in our nation. And so for me, I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is great.
Wow, fantastic. Now, as you mentioned in your wonderful presentation, there's a lot of research behind this, and you know, you throw yourself at and it just, you know, basically sort of consumes your whole life for a period of time there, which I completely understand.
It's like a third of what I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
Now, I've had many conversations in the spaces that I've been a part of in the theatre and screen world about who has the authority to tell what stories. Now, I'm interested to know, what's your take or opinion on outsiders to the Pacific culture recording and telling Papua New Guinean stories? Is there a way to do it correctly? And if so, how?
I think we're at the point now where it's just enough. Like, no. I'm just going to say it. We just need to tell the stories from here on, because there is so much out there. And what I kept coming across was so many stories and so many histories and documents that were kind of telling stories about Papua New Guinean history, but it's never from our perspective or our views. And so that's why I really wanted to kind of highlight Sister Margaret's history, like her 100-year history. Like, I just clutched onto that like it was gold, because it was like, where else am I going to get that? And you know, whenever I did come across histories that were very specific to Ramallah, like the Sisters of War film, it was based on Rod Miller's manuscript of the Australian Catholic sisters and nurses who were at Ramallah. That film completely erased all the mixed race children from the film, and they reduced the 36 nuns, the 36 F.Mi sisters, to one woman. I was just kind of like, what? Like, hang on a minute. And so I just kept coming across that, and I got a lot of interest from the Catholic Church in Australia. Like, they were kind of communicating with me. And then what actually happened was, I'm kind of veering off the question, but I annoyed the crap out of the sisters in Sydney, I think it was the MSC sisters, the archivists there. I kept asking a lot of dumb questions because I didn't know anything about Catholic history or Catholic religion. So what happened was, they ended up writing something on their website like a year later, because I was asking all these questions. And so then that prompted, you know, so now when you actually search, you know, for PNG women sisters on the internet, like all of these references come up now, you know, because when I was doing the research 2 years ago, there was hardly anything. So for me, it was like, yes, all right, there's more kind of information out there, and it's just championing those stories. But it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication, but it's still really important. And I think, you know, using my art practice is one avenue of kind of like I guess, circulating the history and memorializing it, I guess. Yeah.
Is there a way to ever do it correctly if you were outside of that particular of that, you know, Pacific culture?
I don't know, and I don't.
A way to do
It's a hard question to answer, because when I don't know. That's a hard question. I feel like it's to think about that one.
I often get that, you know, in creative rooms or in creative spaces. It's people outside of the Pacific culture wanting to kind of, I guess, they've sort of taken on the onus as if it's their responsibility to tell those stories, and if they don't do it, who else will? And so navigating those conversations can be quite complex and a bit difficult. I guess as you sort of finesse your craft, you get a bit better at saying, hold up, no, you don't have any authority to tell those stories. Sorry, Lisa.
Oh yeah, no, I do have a response now that I've kind of had a bit of time to think about it. I think if people are going to be telling a Pacific story, on behalf of Pacific people, or just the Pacific history, I think they need to really kind of do some reflection in terms of like, what is their kind of, how do they position themselves in that story or in that history? Because I think that's really, really important, because I mean, in the course of the research period, I actually met the descendant of Bishop Louis Coupe, who was the Frenchman who established Vunapope mission.
Wow.
And he's now kind of doing his PhD on the sisters. And we had a lot of conversation back and forth over Facebook Messenger. And not once did I hear, like, during the exchange, I did not hear him kind of talk about his direct genealogical link to that mission. And so I just thought, hang on a minute, you're still doing the same thing, still on the same kind of paradigm of speaking on behalf of a people. And he was kind of asking me all these sorts of questions, like even silly questions like, what is Tolai power? I was just like, okay. But I never once heard him self-reflect upon his own genealogical link into that history. And I just thought, that's a huge oversight, like, I think it's really important to reflect on, like, what is your link, even if it's not genealogical, even if it's historical, like if you're part of a majority kind of group, like part of a European group or Australian group, or look at that kind of connection and reflect upon that and be very self-critical about that. And I think that's how you kind of place yourself very carefully and very, I think that's how you do it. That's the best answer I can give.
Yeah, and so, okay, so do you think Australians actually know how to engage with Pacific artists and Pacific stories through the research and arts world?
No.
No?
That's just flat out no. I've seen way too many Australian artists who aren't from the Pacific who go in and try and like use Pacific art or Pacific, like, oh no, just don't do it, just stop. Like, I'm so over it, it makes my blood boil, and I have to channel all my energy back into my arts practice and do it the right way.
I feel you, Susa, I feel you. So what's your take on Australians' attitudes towards Melanesian stories and histories?
Well, okay. I think we're certainly appreciated as like really great storytellers, but when we're not always given the platform to just kind of hold that space like I'm doing right now. And so I think that's really important, is just being able to hold the space to allow them to tell their stories or tell our stories our way. And I think, if you kind of look at the kind of hierarchy of like who gets to tell and share stories and publish stories and circulate stories, we're kind of always at the bottom. And so it's really hard for us to kind of like get to that level to just be able to speak uninhibited, unhindered, and I think this commission was that opportunity for me to just go hard and just like really center the women of my community. And that was a luxury, but it wasn't that there were always Australians kind of telling me what to do. It was more myself kind of going, can I do this? Am I allowed to center my own people? And always having to like question psychologically, am I allowed to do that? Because of that kind of colonial conditioning, I'm allowed to do it. And so, we're not allowed to center ourselves when, and that was like a big undoing, and I'm always working on that, we're always working on something, internally. And so,
yeah,
I really had to kind of, for myself, until I had to really justify that. And so, I think we're all responsible for, allowing others to kind of share space, hold space, and tell their stories when, when it's needed, when it's really important to do so.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think myself and a lot of other Melanesians and Pacifica people can relate to having to do the work continuously to unpack a lot of that colonial sort of conditioning of being not feeling like you can take up space and being able to center your people in the work. It's almost as if like, am I allowed to? Is this so? I think that's something that we sort of actively do daily. It's always in the back of our minds, I guess.
Totally, and particularly with the commission, because it was, looking at Australia and Papua New Guinea's shared war history, and I'm using Australian taxpayers' money, and so it's kind of like, oh, can I do this, and there was pushback here and there, but I kind of pushed as far as I could go. And so like, even just ensuring, I inserted the Korean and Japanese and Okinawan women's histories in that artwork was like really important. Like I didn't have to do that, but I did it because the F.Mi Sisters supported everyone. They were completely unbiased. And so I just tried to take their kind of, their views and their attitudes the way that they kind of embraced all humans, irrelevant of race, irrelevant of gender, like they just supported everyone. And like, they're my idols.
and rightly so. You mentioned that doing this creative project, it challenged a lot of your own sort of perceptions of religion and how that's, so maybe tell us a little bit about that, maybe just how that challenged that.
Oh my God, can of worms. Well, I guess because I'd already come from the perspective of, the religion and colonialism came in and basically like fractured the culture of Papua New Guinea and, but also introduced new structures that we kind of still embrace today, like religion. And over the years, I've kind of learned that, I was raised religious. I hated going to church as a child. Like I hated it. And kind of like, went to church with my mum begrudgingly. And then once I became an adult, I kind of was like, no, not into religion. But then I don't have any issues with religion. It was just not for me. And
Wow.
So over the years, I've understood that how important spirituality is to Papua New Guineans and all Pacific Islanders, and a lot of spirituality rather than like, oh, it's this religion, because when European religion came to the Pacific and particularly Papua New Guinea, we embraced it, but we also indigenized it. That's what I kept seeing. And so in the F.Mi Sisters convent, I saw this beautiful structure. They had like this garden, and there was like a little kind of, I guess, honoring of like, the Ave Maria, and she's standing, and they've got this beautiful like little Tolai architectural structure, which we call Palnapidik, and it's a sacred kind of structure. And so they combined indigenous kind of architecture designs, sort of motifs with, European kind of female spiritual deity. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then I was also reading about hymnody. Hymnody, the choral singing, and how we indigenized European hymns as well. And so I was looking at that and kind of going, oh wow, this is amazing, because we've just completely transformed a different kind of I guess culture that's kind of been introduced and made it our own. And that's what we do as Pacific Islanders. We're always kind of reinventing and redesigning things that kind of fit and purpose our beliefs and our ideas. So I had to really embrace these sisters' perspectives and knowledges of why they joined the church, and also confronting that there was gender inequality within my own community. And so that was probably the biggest one. I was like, no, it's not here. And it was Sister Margaret who kind of enlightened me, and I was like, oh, like, and I kind of like walked out of there, like my head down. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do some like soul searching here.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm also a woman, a Papua New Guinean woman who's grown up outside of the culture. So there was a lot of kind of, I was very naive in terms of like, a lot of the kind of the insights and personal experiences. And so that was really important, that I just embraced their perspective. And so, you know, and my family are religious. I respect everyone that's religious. I don't have any issues about religion. It's just, I think there's a lot to be learned through the teachings and of religion in terms of the values of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Right, so, sorry, Lisa.
Oh, no, you go.
No, I was just going to veer off into the next question, but did you have anything that you want to just add to that? No? Okay. Okay. So just to maybe step into in terms of your process as an artist, whenever I write or devise creative projects, I often ask the question, who am I creating this for and why, as somewhat of an anchor to kind of, you know, to bounce off and sort of ground me in my work. I'm wondering, through your work as an artist, a researcher and historian, who do you create your work for, and who is it most important for you to reach?
I feel like the first person I make work for is for me. Like selfish. It's because I want to see the things that I don't see, and
yes.
that's what I always aspire to when I make artwork. Is just, I'm not seeing this. This isn't being represented. I need to see this. And then when I do that, I find that there's a lot of other people that kind of are drawn to that, and then I hear their experiences kind of go, oh, you too? Awesome. Okay, so it's kind of like this connection of like, okay, so if I'm feeling this, then you must be feeling this too. And I kind of find my community that way.
Yeah.
But for this particular commission, like, I felt like I was making it for both, for Papua New Guineans and Australians, because like Australian and Papua New Guinean's history goes back, like it's deep, and it's going to be there forever. And I kind of wrestled with that for a little bit. I was like, oh, okay, we ever going to be able to, like, you know, kind of unshackle that? But it's like, no, I think, you know, there's good and bad things in all relationships. And so I just wanted to really highlight that this was a really positive aspect of that shared history. And so I felt like I was making it for the F.Mi Sisters. It was more to kind of honour them. And so it was just like, I want to make this for them because they need to be honoured. They need to be known in terms of what they do. Because I think people kind of just dismiss or kind of just think that nuns are just kind of like, you know, kind of tucked away with their prayer beads, like doing nothing, you know. And I certainly had that assumption too. I was like, so what do you guys do? You know, I just had no idea. I was like, what do you guys, I just was like, okay. And then I realized, okay, what they do is actually really, really important for them and for the broader community, because I realized that, you know, through their teachings and their education, they were able to teach the next generation of Papua New Guineans in terms of education. And so I'm sort of veering off again, sorry, but I'm going to come back to the question.
No, you're good, you're fine.
I wanted to make the work for the F.Mi Sisters because they needed to be honoured. But I also wanted to show, you know, Australians that the sense of humanity of Papua New Guinean people, particularly Papua New Guinean women, that was really important, because I don't feel like our voices are heard strongly or loudly enough in terms of like an autonomous voice, an independent voice. And I just wanted to show the amazingness of these women, because they're the kind of women that I grew up with in my community, in my family. I related to these women because I knew them. Like, that was like, oh yeah, of course. Like, that's just what Papua New Guinean women do. They will go and like trudge down the mountain and carry the food and bring it to you. Like, that's just what they do. And I don't think people understand. I think there's this very negative view, particularly in the media, of Papua New Guinean women, you know, that we're just kind of like beaten down, and you know, like it's that's not the case, and that's not the Papua New Guinea that I know and that I see and that I experience and that I've lived. And so I just wanted to show a different side, a very beautiful aspect of Papua New Guinean women's humanity. Like, that's what it was about for me.
Yeah, and I love that you've definitely sort of, you know, humanized these amazing women. And oftentimes PNG women are portrayed as you know, as these silent not forces, but there's, you know, oftentimes you don't regularly see them or they're not acknowledged for their contributions to, you know, to history, to communities. And so, you know, I think I draw a lot of similarities to your process as well. We start off having these little seedlings of ideas of trying to understand our world and what it's like to be in this skin and to speak this language and understand where our ancestors have come from. And so you start out with that, and then you realize that it's actually a bigger, broader, you know, themes and subject that our community can sort of relate and connect with. So I think it's fantastic. Now, finally, last question. Black women have featured prominently in your work from the jump, from the get-go. What has learning about the F.M.I's sister stories added to your life as an academic, artist, and Melanesian woman?
Oh man, big question. I think it's given me a sense of a deeper understanding of spirituality, women's autonomy in Papua New Guinea. Like that's been a big thing for me in terms of understanding that, because I didn't, and you know, and I humbly acknowledge that I had these assumptions, and I think it's really important to do that. As a researcher, as an academic, as an artist, I think, you know, it's really important to do that, because if you don't, then you're not always going to get the story that you think you want or that should be told. You know, you can go in and, you know, kind of like try and get the story, you know, that you want, but is that the story that you shared? Like, is that a true story from that person's perspective, or whoever it is that you're kind of talking to for the research? And so I was just always really mindful of that, and ensuring that I kind of, you know, acted in that kind of Melanesian way of like when I engaged with people from my community. And so I think, I feel like I am in the perfect position to be able to tell these kinds of stories. That's what I've learned. You and I, both like we're the perfect people to be telling these kinds of stories. And I think it's really important that we use our platforms to do it. And so if you I'm speaking broadly to the group, if you recognize, you know, that you're a person that has like these distinct qualities or traits, identity, cultural affiliations, go and tell that story, because you have a very important and distinct insight into a sense of identity, history, story from that particular community group. I think that's really, really important. And no one from outside of the community will ever understand that and get as close to that than you.
Incredible. Thank you, Susa. Did that whole thing without fangirling too much, so I'm really proud of myself. Lisa, I'd like to thank you for your time and also for the creative work and endeavors that you pursue, your passion for history, you're reactivating cultural objects, and your active choices in centering our people's narrative, particularly Melanesian women, is nothing short of amazing and extremely valuable to our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, Lisa. That was incredible. I'm really humbled by witnessing that, your presentation, Lisa, and that exchange between both of you. I feel like that was the most epic historical occasion, and I was also feeling quite emotional throughout the whole thing because of the resonances with so many of our communities and our histories, from the World War II dimension to you know, discussions about being in Japanese war camps. My great-grandfather was in a Japanese war camp on Banaba and also in Kosrae, to the Catholic part. I am Catholic, and so the discussion of religion and spirituality, I think, is something that is deeply important historically and as part of our contemporary communities as well. So even though the focus was on Papua New Guinea and on Papua New Guinean women and your specific journey, and then the incredible dialogue between both of you, who are both very powerful storytellers, the resonances and how much many of us can relate to it is so powerful as well. And that is why it's so important to bring these stories out. There are a couple of other questions, I think some which have been shared in the chat. So before we take a break, I just wanted to open it up in case anybody else would like to ask questions of Lisa and perhaps also Wendy as well. There was a question about whether or not the exhibition is still on.
Yeah, I'm just reading through all the chat. So the Australian War Memorial is trying to have a touring exhibition because there was a number of commissioned artists from across the Asia and Pacific region. So it's all to do with funding and resources, and COVID just kind of upended everything. So okay. I'll be circulating stuff when that happens, but I know that they're in the process of trying to tour the works at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Did anyone want to ask a question or add a comment in person? And I note some new people have joined us as well. Just want to also acknowledge Imelda Davis, who is a really important member of and leader within the South Sea Islander communities, and a very valuable member and person who's constantly contributing to this space in which Pacific people, South Sea Islander communities especially, need to tell their stories at a national level, because the significance of that politically, socially, and culturally for the whole of Australia is so critical. So Imelda, it really means a lot to us that you've joined us in this space. So thank you for being there. And when and if you ever want to say something, the floor is yours immediately.
Oh no, look, thank you, Tomas. It's really nice for you to acknowledge, and I acknowledge everyone around the table. I'm here on Gadigal country, here in Sydney, one of the 29 clans of the Eora Nation, and I think many of you know about the work that we do here in Pyrmont, Australian South Sea Islanders, Port Jackson, and yeah, accountability in terms of Australia's relationship with what's occurred historically. And until such time we have reconciliation around that, I think we'll continue to face issues that are happening even now with seasonal workers scheme and things like that. So we're very proactive, as you know, and yeah, it's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces here as well today. So acknowledging everyone there too. And I look forward to continuing, you know. Here we go, I've got a bit of a rave, but either way, it's like we've got this oceanic, this sugar fest, and there's just so much inspiration coming from this agenda today. And Katerina, thank you, you know, for the great work that you guys do. And I'd just like to look at how do we build this relationship and how do we really take control of the narrative, you know, let's own the space and take back or create that, you know, that evident belonging for this nation, in that, you know, the Pacific is relevant, and people need to understand just how important we are to this nation, and also reconnecting with our families across the Pacific, you know, like, yeah, there's so much power to be reckoned with in this Zoom today, and it's just, I'm very excited at the possibilities. So thank you, Tomas.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else would like to add to the conversation at this stage, or respond to Lisa and Wendy's powerful sharing this morning?
Effie, you go ahead.
Matiki mo matiki tu munu tangalo. Matiki mo matiki tu munu tangalo. Si paio ko eleo fia ha Pacifica la I tuai. Whakasipeta o lima lue ulu talulu e tau hui. Tukaloa, chehui. and that is an acknowledgement of you, our keynote speaker, and Wendy, the facilitator. Wonderful dialogue. Malo.
Oh, Vinaka Pefi. Really appreciate that. That was beautiful. Vinaka. I'm just letting the silence go for a little bit because I feel like that is the appropriate response right now to everything that has been shared this morning. Wait, okay, here goes Kati, getting emotional. Yeah. Really, really powerful stuff. And really, really important. For you, your families, your communities, but also for all of us. And also because of what's going on in the Pacific at the moment. Australia's ongoing special dramatic relationship with our region, the colonial histories, the extractive histories, but as Lisa's presentation underscored, the powerful humanity of everyone who ends up being embroiled in these histories. And that's the job of our working party, to bring these things to light and to center voices and conversations like the ones that we had this morning. So maybe this is an appropriate time to take a wee break and get a cup of tea. But again, to thank you all so much for being part of this first part of our workshop. And I do understand if some of you need to leave as well, because it's a really busy time. But for those of you who are going to stay a bit longer, I hope we can continue these conversations, because we do have a couple of things that we'd like to discuss and to think about ways to move forward with this powerful beginning that we've had, again, with Lisa. What incredible work. Wendy, thank you so much. Oh, kampasin rapa, vinakavakale busara.